Welcome to this Gifts of God program talk, and I'm so happy to be here and have you with us. And I'm so inspired today by the subject I want to talk about. I mean, of course, it's always something about the Course in Miracles, isn't it? But I wanted to give a little bit of background about the importance of this work on a broader scale, like on a kind of a world scale, right? And I think that Tara Singh, my teacher, made some points pretty clear to me that maybe I haven't talked about, but that I need to talk about. And so let's start there. One of the phrases that Tara Singh used to describe A Course in Miracles is, he said, it's a gift for all mankind, a gift for all mankind. And then the other point that he made of its importance was the fact that it came out of he called it the New World. He didn't refer to America so much as America, but he referred to this America and this side of the Atlantic as the New World. And then he said, well, the Course in Miracles came out of the New World, and it was an extension of kind of a mission that America had. And he talked about what that mission was and why did it come now in our time, and what was the preparation that needed to take place in order for it to come to us. So he called it, a gift for all mankind. And then when I met Sandra Ray and was introduced to it for the first time, she called it the most important book written in 2,000 years. And I think both of those are true. I think, in fact, it is the most important book written in 2,000 years. And even though it's Christian in tone, it's not a religion per se. It's more of a correction of religion. And I think it doesn't take you long when you're studying it to see that there was some false religious theology that we were taught as children, like original sin and guilt and this, like, Jesus died for you and he's the only Son of God, and because you were so lost, he had to come and die for your sins. And, so we were fed those kinds of things, right? Well, for better or worse, they weren't true necessarily. And it took major force to correct that in our minds, because it was so embedded in the way organized Christianity presented Jesus's message that it would take almost Jesus coming again to correct those mistakes. Plus the fact that in the history of mankind since Jesus's mission 2,000 years ago, there have often been wars where both sides are, quote unquote, praying to the same God and praying to the same Jesus. And how can that be? If he was teaching forgiveness, love, tolerance, how can war and killing be justified in his name? And, people saying, oh, well, we're on the right side and we have to vanquish the infidels. So he wouldn't have been that kind of a justification. So a lot of things needed to be corrected. And what happened was he sent the correction. Now, I wrote a book a couple of years ago, and it was kind of my commentary on the Course in Miracles. And I called it the second coming, right? The second coming being, it is actually the second coming. The Course in Miracles is the second coming that Jesus spoke about in the Bible. It's not how we thought it was going to be. We thought, oh, well, he'll come again in another body and he'll be, a person on the world stage, and there'll be things that he does that continue the mission that he started 2,000 years ago. Well, in fact, The Course in Miracles is a continuation of the mission he started 2,000 years ago, but he sent his mind, and he didn't come in a body, right? He just sent his mind down, which is very significant because a lot of the lessons in The Course in Miracles are trying to get us connected to the essence of the mind, and it makes it very clear that the body is just a vehicle for acting out what's in the mind. So anything that would be quote unquote behavioral in our changes in a physical body would have to begin with some correction of the mental state. So he didn't really need to come down in a body. He just needed to send his mind down with those corrections, which he did, fortunately for us. And fortunately for us, there was a woman that he picked to send this mind down to, and her name was Dr. Helen Schucman, as you all know. And she was a clinical psychologist at Columbia University in the 1960s. And this is when the material started to come to her. So he picked her, and she was most likely prepared from lifetimes to do this work. And Tara Singh said, well, she had the purity of Mary, even though she wasn't Mary. She wasn't an incarnation of Mary or reincarnation of Mary. She had her own purity. But what he said about her was Mary gave birth to Jesus's body, and Dr. Schucman gave birth to Jesus's mind. So because she had that kind of a mind, and he also knew that the problems of this age are psychological problems. There are problems in the psyche, right? The mind. And who better than a PhD in psychology who knows that language of the mind would be the one that I would transmit this information to. So she was groomed to do this scribing of this Course in Miracles, which the more I see it and the more I understand it, I see that it truly is the second coming. It's the second coming that awakens the coming of the Christ in us, right? So it's not a person, the Christ is not a personality. The Christ, there was a man, Jesus, who had a personality, who realized that state and maybe had realized it in many lifetimes, right? And so he comes and he transmits this energy of the Christ and what that is and what that means and what that action is. So he does his work and he does all his miracles. He does his thing where he resurrects from the dead, which is really what established him as the Christ. It wasn't the fact he got crucified that made him the Christ. It was the fact that he resurrected from the dead that made him the Christ. And he was saying, well, you can do anything to the body, but the human spirit is in charge, and the human spirit is immortal. So death does not play a part in our reality. And he proved that. All right. So now there's his life. We all see it. It's been accounted for. But now 2,000 years later, things have gone a little bit awry, with the teachings. So he has to come again. And how does he come? He says, well, the mistakes were made in the mind, therefore the mistakes have to be corrected in the mind. And I'm going to come down again with this Course in Miracles, and it's going to be that correction. It's going to show people that the essence of their true self is already the Christ, or you could call it the Buddha, you could call it the Mohammed, you could call it the Maharshi, whatever that high state is in human evolution, where we achieve non-duality, we achieve unconditional love. We're in this unanimous unification with all the other human beings on the planet. You could call that the Christ consciousness. So what the Course is doing is it's the coming of the Christ consciousness in a way that awakens the Christ consciousness in us. So no longer is it like, oh, you're a sinner and Jesus had to come to save you because you were so bad. No, Jesus came to awaken us to be the Christ like him. So it's really an ascension process. Or in the Eastern philosophy, they would call it the Santana Dharma. It's like a way of living where you ascend through the different levels of being, and you overcome the lower levels of your ego, and you rise into the higher levels of your divine self. All right, and that process they would call like a sadhana or a yoga, and it takes you through all these levels of evolution within yourself so that you rise to the consciousness of these godlike, holy beings. Because in fact, you yourself are a godlike, holy being. And maybe you're asleep to that fact, but that's just the fact. That's who you really are. And so the Course is designed for us to undo all these lower levels of consciousness and rise up into this Christ consciousness. And that's just a fact. Anybody who's studied the Course for any period of time realizes that's what the thing is trying to do for us. And that's what the thing, in fact, does do for us when we give it adequate attention. Like when we do the lessons, read the text, give it our daily attention, give it our study, it actually does transform us. And then we're even given kind of the life lessons along the way to test us to see how well we got the lessons, right? So I mean, when it tells you drop all your grievances and don't have any judgments, well, the first thing that's going to happen is the person in your life that you have a lot of grievances towards and you have a lot of judgments towards is going to be right there in your face testing you. So it's like it's a life lesson. It's a course that takes you to higher levels of your consciousness, but it works in tandem with your actual everyday life where it sees that, well, this set of theories is meaningless unless you're actually living it. And the only way you can live it is to get these examples in your life where you're tested. You know, are you applying the principle to those situations? So this is what it is. And I think we all know that's what it is. And that's why we're so in love with the process, because it actually does transform us. Now, I want to say, well, how did it and why did it come out of America? You know, because it did. It came out of New York City, the busiest city probably in the world at the time. It came in a period when, Kennedy had been assassinated, Martin Luther King had been assassinated, Robert Kennedy had been assassinated. A lot of the leaders that were progressive were being assassinated. We're in the middle of the Vietnam War, which there was a lot of dissent about that. And we're also in the middle of the civil rights movement and the feminist movement, where blacks and women wanted to be recognized equally. All right. So it's a very trying time out of which this Course in Miracles arrives. And it's no accident that the times were such that it would take a Christ, it would take a higher consciousness to liberate us out of those conflicts, conundrums, contradictions in our belief systems, all that. We needed a Course in Miracles at the time. And Jesus saw, well, this is the perfect timing and the perfect place. And so he came down, and it just happened to be in the New World. So I think Tara Singh recognized this. He was my teacher of the Course in Miracles, and he was the teacher of the Course in Miracles because Dr. Schucman, who's the one who scribed it, was his teacher. All right. So he met her kind of by a fluke when he blundered into the Course in Miracles and met the publisher. And then he recognized immediately what it was, this Course in Miracles. And he insisted upon meeting the lady that brought it in, which he did. And he needed determination to do that. And then once he met her, she became his teacher for a couple of years. And he talked to her every day. And she kind of groomed him to disseminate the Course to the public, because she didn't want to have a public role with the Course. And so he taught the Course in Miracles for 25 years. And 17 of those I was with him. So he had a lot to say about the destiny of America. Why did the Course come to America? And it was very interesting how he presented it. So I wrote this other book, The Master is Beautiful. This one, Master is Beautiful. And in that, there's a chapter. If you notice, there's a picture of Abraham Lincoln on the front here, right? There are 9 masters I talk about. And one is Tara Singh, my teacher, and one is Dr. Schucman, who scribed the Course. But there are these other masters that Tara Singh referred to as the spiritual founding fathers of America. He said they were not the same as the original founding fathers. We would, in studying our history, see that Washington was a founding father of America. Benjamin Franklin was this other character who was very instrumental. Thomas Jefferson and this other man, John Adams. They were the first presidents and founders of the nation. And it was Jefferson who actually wrote this Declaration of Independence. And this is what established our freedom from the old world, from the kings and, the parliaments of old that were controlling, the colonies. So it was quite an act of defiance to state this Declaration of Independence and establish a new nation, and then have to fight a whole war to free themselves from this world power. So at the time, England was the world power. It was the most powerful, most outstretching country in Europe. It had the biggest armies, the biggest navies, the most money, and it could pretty much control any colony that it set up. And the colonies felt that they were being unjustly controlled. So they declared this independence. So the founding fathers, Tara Singh said, were needed. And, Jefferson wrote this document, the Declaration of Independence, and in it says, we declare these inalienable rights that are self-evident, that every man is created equal by his creator, and have these self-evident truths that establish his liberty, his pursuit of happiness, and that every human being has a right to that divine will, so to speak, and divine government. It's not through a king, not through a church, not through a priest. It's through a divine gift that we're given these inalienable rights. Well, that had not really been established in the history of humankind before. So those were very new concepts. And that was part of the power of this establishing these United States. And that was kind of the first wave of freedom. We had to get free from the old world. We had to get free from the old methods of government that were kings, that were given those rights they claimed from God, and they had the right to rule for life. And well, we're abolishing all that, right? And saying we want a democracy. We want the people to be the determiner of our destiny, and the people can decide and govern themselves. And that was very new. So that was the first wave of freedom in the US. And we fought the war to establish it, and those great beings, Washington, Franklin, Jefferson, Adams, were determined enough to get the thing going, and they did. However, slavery was still very much rampant in the US during those times, and you had Franklin, who lived in Philadelphia, and Jefferson and Washington, who lived in Virginia, all owned slaves. So there was a bit of a contradiction in the statement, all men are created equal and everyone deserves these inalienable rights. For men who put forth that philosophy, they had an obvious contradiction in that there was an area where they weren't applying it, right? Namely, slavery. They all had slaves. John Adams didn't, because he lived in Boston, and it was a northern state, and they didn't so much have slavery up there, but they did have indentured servants where people would be, indebted to a kind of a boss or a master for a number of years while they were working off some debt that they had to pay. So there was indentured service, but not so much slavery. But in the southern states and even in the middle states, in New York and Philadelphia, the institution of slavery still was going. So what that made was a contradiction in the freedoms that they were presenting. So then the second wave of freedom, and this is where Tara Singh really focused in, he said there were spiritual founding fathers of America. And that's where Lincoln comes in. And I wrote a chapter about that in this book because there were four men that Tara Singh said were the spiritual founding fathers of America. And they were Lincoln and this philosopher, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and his student, Henry David Thoreau, down here. And then this other man who was a poet, Walt Whitman. So he said Lincoln, Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman were really the spiritual founding fathers of America because they took the principles of all men are created equal, right? And everybody's endowed with these inalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and brought them into application. So for Lincoln, it was not possible to go on as a nation based on freedom, based on all men are created equal, and maintain the institution of slavery. So then the whole Civil War was fought, and all these men lived their lives around that same period. In the middle of the 1800s, America was like 80 years old, and it was around that time they all expressed their highest ideals. And Lincoln was the statesman. So he was the one that was involved in fighting this big Civil War to abolish slavery. But at the same time, Emerson was a philosopher, educated at at Harvard, in Boston. He was originally a minister, a Unitarian minister, but then that was also a time when Harvard was starting to translate Eastern texts like the Bhagavad Gita, Sanskrit. They were starting to translate the Eastern philosophies so that learned people knew there were these ancient religions that were very lofty and very, some of the principles that they were trying to get across in the American culture were long established thousands of years ago in India, right? And they're starting to translate these texts, and they're starting to see how profound they are. So it affected their whole philosophy. And Emerson started this movement of philosophy called the Transcendentalists. And a lot he has to owe to these Eastern philosophies of like the Vedas and the Upanishads and, the epic stories, the Bhagavad Gita, and some of those principles that were brought down through those Eastern stories. They incorporated them into their philosophy. And so they were very progressive spiritually. And they saw that there should be a unification of religions of the world, not a division. Religion should unify, not divide. And they began to see that. So Emerson and Thoreau was Emerson's student, started to transform the philosophies of America at a very high level, at very high astute institutions, And then this Walt Whitman, he was a newspaper man, right? He printed newspapers. He was an editor of a newspaper, but he was also a poet. And he could write in such a way that captured the essence of how broad and how encompassing the human experiment in America was. And he wrote about not just, people in high places, but he wrote about, the beauty of people on the street. He was kind of like a Christ figure. In the war, the Civil War, he actually worked in Washington in the hospitals for the wounded. And he was like taking care of all these wounded soldiers for a couple of years when they came back from the battlefront. And he was really kind of a Christ figure. And he had this connection to people's souls, and he could really relate to them in a very direct way. And his message in his poetry is that kind of egalitarian human connection. So these four men, Whitman, Thoreau, Emerson, and Lincoln, Tarson called the spiritual founding fathers. And they took America from the theory to the application. Like Jefferson wrote, all men are created equal, but it took a Lincoln to be willing to go through the Civil War and free the slaves to actually bring that into application. So that was more or less the second wave of freedom that America went through. Now, fast forward to the 20th century, we have all these fascists, all these warring factors in Europe. We have Hitler, we have the Japanese, emperor, and they're trying to establish, kind of world domination. And there's something we have to do to prevent that. And so this victory over fascism that we went through in the 20th century had to happen, and we were able to more or less defeat or help defeat fascism around the world. So that was kind of our destiny out in the greater world, right? Tara Singh said after World War II, we were in such a great position to help the world because we were so prosperous. And we did. We had certain plans in place where we were very, helpful to underdeveloped countries. There was a Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, and there were plans to help underdeveloped countries. However, we got a little sidetracked in the quote unquote Cold War and the military industrial complex, and we went a bit off track. And, it became, well, we'll only support the countries where we can have military bases. So it became a bit, off course, right? And then the fourth element of freedom in America was women, and the fact that there was still a lot of racial injustice. So women were not getting their rights, and blacks, even though they'd been freed in the Civil War, were still under the unwritten laws of prejudice, Jim Crow, social weight of keeping them down. So there had to be this other kind of revolution of feminism and equal rights and racial rights. And that was kind of the fourth wave, that had to happen, which did in the 1960s and 70s, and is still going on now. But I think we've progressed quite far to have had, a black president, and, people are coming up. And I think America is reestablishing it. It is a melting pot of people from all over the world. And now we're even facing religious freedoms more and more, because there's so many different religious factions in the U.S. And now this is where the Course in Miracles comes in, because what the Course does, it establishes a freedom that's beyond governments, right? What did you think of when you read that lesson 76? I'm under no laws but God's. There's a level of enlightenment, or there's a level of truth that is so far beyond governments. And basically it's saying any conflict whatsoever that you make is from this ego's thought system, and it's not the truth. So you may justify conflicts in your relationships, conflicts in your politics, conflicts in your dealings, on a large scale, on a national scale and an international scale. But in essence, if something is true, it's peace. If something is true, it's love, it's cooperation, it's not conflict. So the next gift, I would say, that America has to give the world is to come to this inner peace, this inner truth, where we see that war and conflict in general does not solve the problems of man. It's not something that we can export, It's not something where we can take sides and say, oh, well, this faction is right and this faction is wrong, so we're going to send billions of military dollars to support a war somewhere. We have to get beyond that. And Babaji would say, there's only one humanity. So for us to be divided in these countries and then have all these military budgets in which we're wasting money and we're just pouring into the sorrow and suffering of humankind is stupid. And we're smart enough to see that now. And the Course in Miracles makes it very clear. God's will for us is perfect happiness. Now, I don't care if you call that a God of the Jews or a God of the Buddha or a God of the Muslims or a God of the Christians. God is God, and God's will for us is happiness and peace. It's not factions and fighting and differences. So this is what the Course in Miracles sets forth. You know, when it says, I'm under no laws but God's, it says your only law that you're under is God's law, and God's law is to love everybody and have something to give that contributes to people's well-being. That's the only law there is the love in your heart to give. And if you don't have that, then you're under the ego's laws, and those will lead to conflict, those will lead to suffering, and those will lead to death. So which do you want? And people in high places need to get this. It's like we can't go on justifying expenditure on things that aren't productive. We think they protect us, but why did we make up the fear that we needed to protect us from in the first place? So we projected the fear, and then we projected these, $1 trillion military budgets to, quote, protect us. But we made the initial mistake of seeing that we're separated when we're not separated. Seeing that we can't get along, we can't cooperate with others in the world, when that's our job to get along and apply the forgiveness that we apply to the people in our life on a broader scale and see that there's one humanity, not a bunch of divided tribes and divided factions and divided nations. And people that are so-called educated need to be embracing these higher truths. So they're laid out very clearly in the Course in Miracles. And I would say the fifth wave of freedom that America has to give the world is this Course in Miracles, and is this way of thinking in which we're unifying, not dividing, and we're forgiving, we're not blaming, and we're getting over the histories of all the wrongdoing that people did to us and we did to them, and we put all that in the past, and we get on with what Sandra used to call, because she was in the Peace Corps, the Love Corps. It's like love is not stupid. And sometimes people in high places that are very calculating think that love is too simple. It doesn't account for all the complexities and all the intrigues of the government and the necessities. Well, we make military budgets necessary, but we can just as easily make them obsolete. Tarsing used to use this example, and I thought it was a very good example of what's truly productive, right? He would ask, well, what is truly productive? If you make a tractor, you spend, $20,000 and you make a tractor, that tractor will then go out and plow the fields for years and years and years, produce crops, produce things that feed the people. And you can truly say that tractor is productive because it'll go on then, and from that produce other things that are very valuable for life, very valuable for human perpetuation. And you can truly call that act productive. Now, you spend the same money, probably 100 times more, and you make a warplane. What does that warplane produce? It doesn't produce anything. At best, you're going to use it to destroy something. And then you have to maintain it with a lot of money. First, you have to build it with a lot of money. Then you've got to maintain it with a lot of money and put people in it that aren't so thinking in terms of producing something. So it's absolutely not productive. It's absolutely not productive. Now, you may think that it protects you, but that's not the philosophy of the Course in Miracles. The philosophy of that would be there's nothing to fear, and anything you are fearing is your own projection and your own decision that that thing is real, and you have to protect yourself from it. And then that's very clearly wrong thinking in terms of the Course in Miracles. Well, my feeling about the Course is that it is for people who have minds of the age that can see more deeply into things, and those people that are affecting the destiny of nations need to know about it and need to be influenced by it. Just like some of the best minds in India are also devotees of Babaji, and they're tempering their life with service to humanity, and egalitarian causes and things that are serving people. So we have to shift into this idea of prospering for our own ends, and prospering for the ends of the whole. And Babaji would call that service or karma yoga. And so I think that the Course in Miracles is ready for this, and that America is also ready to get what it actually is. And some of the people that are making those decisions need to know about it. So it's my greatest wish that we're here in Washington, not that because we're political, we're here in Washington because Babaji put us here. So there must be some reason why we're here. And maybe there are some of these people in government that we're meant to meet, and we already have met some. And these discussions need to take place. So that's my feeling about the destiny of America and the destiny of the Course in Miracles. It came out of America, and it's very interesting numerologically. That lesson, I'm under no laws but God's, it's number 76. And this Declaration of Independence that Jefferson wrote in 1776, it's the same numerology. 1776 was when America was founded. And this lesson 76, I'm under no laws but God's, it's like a higher truth. And, it could impart, great change if we really saw what it is. So I'm very optimistic. I think that our work always starts with we have to apply the Course in our everyday lives individually, and that's always going to be where any spiritual transformation has to start. Not on this grandiose scale, but individual people actually applying it and transforming their own lives. And then if you get enough of us who've actually done that, and we really actually have brought the Course in Miracles into application, then that can have an impact on the people around us. And that's always how it's been. It took one Jesus to know who he was to affect the whole world over 2,000 years. So it's always going to be an individual effort, on our part to lift ourselves up and rise through those levels, in our consciousness to go to our higher truth, our higher self. And that's always going to be our responsibility as an individual. And as far as the impact of that, we leave the future in the hands of God, right? I leave the future in the hands of God, and whatever the impact of that, of our own individual work is going to be on the people around us, that's kind of a collaborative venture between us and God. And we don't always know what that is. But certain things come in front of us. And when they do come in front of us, we can't ignore it. You know, like, why did Babaji put this woman right in front of us who's like one of the confidants of an American senator? And there she is right up on the hill, 2 miles away. So there's something brewing here, and I'm inspired by it. Because I have the background to see from studying with Tara Singh how important the Course is to the destiny of America. And that this is probably the greatest gift we have to give right now in these times. And why don't we get with it, So that's my little treatise on the Course, the destiny of America. So thank you all for being here, and thank you all for being part of this Gifts of God program. I'm very grateful. God bless.